Welcome back to another Tempo Storm Wild Hearthstone video. With the full reveal of Rastakhan's Rumble just finished, we now have a full picture of what the next set'll look like. This period in between full card reveal and expansion release is one of great excitement, with many players theory crafting decks and content producers creating card reviews. Here at Tempo Storm, we've started a tradition of looking at cards once a set has fully been revealed and exploring the synergies that they have not only in the standard format, but the wild one as well. With the power level of wild being considerably higher than the standard one, you may expect for new cards to have a lower impact on the format. In most cases, this is true, but in a few situations, there are some cards which see much more play in wild compared to standard, as they synergize heavily with cards that have rotated out in the past. We have started the tradition of looking at the top cards each expansion that we believe will have more of an impact on the wild metagame compared to standard. Here are our top 5 from Rastakhan's set. Belligerent Gnome. Belligerent Gnome is the first card on our list, and it may seem out of place due to its rather simple effect, but we assure you that we believe it'll have a slight impact on the wild meta, which is more than we expected to see in standard. Normally, cards that get into this list have synergies with cards in their own decks which make them stronger, but Belligerent Gnome is rather unique, and certain cards which are prevalent in the wild meta that your opponent might play actually make this card stronger. Belligerent Gnome is a card that fits really well into mid-range decks as an anti-aggro tech, as a 2-mana 2/4 taunt is a very strong play on turn 2 to counter any aggressive 1-drops and gain board advantage. However, in Standard, against aggro decks on turn 2, you'll often be looking down only one mission, if any at all, which fails to activate Belligerent Gnome's battle cry, which greatly decreases the power level of the card, as a 1/4 stat line is rather weak when fighting against 1-drops, let alone any 2-mana minions played afterwards. This leads us to believe that the card will see little to no play in the format. In Wild, however, there is one card which buffs the Gnome into potential playability. Patches the Pirate. Almost every aggro deck in this format at the moment plays Pirates due to the board advantage that Patches gives you when he's pulled from your deck. This means that more often than not, when you get to turn 2, your opponent already has 2 minions on board. Essentially, that means that when playing Belligerent Gnome against wild aggro decks, it's almost always going to be a 2-mana 2/4, even when coined out on turn 1. One of the main things to be concerned about, though, is that even though the power level of this card is significantly higher in the wild meta due to patches, it may not be good enough to see play. However, when building a mid-range deck, Belligerent Gnome will often be a consideration, especially if the meta is to be as aggressive as the past few months have been. Spirit of the Dragonhawk. With the first Rastakhan livestream, Spirit of the Dragonhawk was revealed as a Mage 2-drop, which made our team rather excited, as we had just recently predicted the cards that Rastakhan would be bringing us, and we were really hoping for a strong even minion for Mage. With the reveal of the Mage Loa, it seems that in Standard, the hero power shenanigans will potentially focus along the lines of odd cards and be centered around the hero power that deals 2 damage. This ultimately will only allow for a Spirit of the Dragonhawk to see play in very few use cases in Standard. However, in Wild, we have Even Mage, which already is a fringe deck that plays cards that interact with your 1-mana hero power, such as Fallen Hero and Garrison Commander. With the introduction of Spirit of the Dragonhawk, we foresee that this Gen Mage deck will start to see the limelight and potentially will be as high as a Tier 2 deck. The ability for Even Mage to get a card which heavily interacts with your opponent's board is exactly what the deck needed, as aggro decks are fairly often able to go wide. The ability to deal 3 damage on turn 3 with this card and retain the ability for the next turn due to stealth will be extremely strong in this deck, especially when your hero power only costs 1 mana. Combine this with multiple hero powers or extra damage, and this card could potentially propel Even Mage into a major spot in the wild metagame. We look forward to the potential that this card provides to the archetype. Growl the Shark. Similarly to the Spirit of the Dragonhawk, Growl the Shark is another card which fell into an archetype that we predicted would be pushed this expansion in our pre-Rastakhan prediction video. With Dane's archetype of Big Rogue being a fan-favorite deck, it could potentially be a pretty interesting inclusion. Certain versions of the deck are running late-game bombs such as Ragnaros, Lich King, Sneed Shredder, Kel'Thuzad, and sometimes even Y'Shaarj. And when you play Growl in a deck like this, you'll have a high chance of something around a 10/10's worth of stats, and queue up Tutor Draw for a big legendary effect which can be cheated out by Kobold Illusionist. Growl the Shark isn't the strongest of cards, as it does have some drawbacks, notably its insane weakness to silence. However, in Big Rogue, you're not as hurt by the silence on this minion, as your other minions are also really strong targets for silence, like Kobold Illusionist and Silver Vanguard. If your Growl gets silenced, that opens up the ability for your other minions to cheat out their minions. This is not going to be the major hesitation from Growl seeing play in the deck. It'll actually be the reduction on the strength of your Barns when you have this potential to pull a 1/1 version of Growl. Hopefully the strength that this card provides to the deck is worth the low roll on your Barns and pushes this archetype forward. Warmaster Voon. Warmaster Voon looks like a rather interesting card, as getting extra copies of dragons seems to be a rather strong effect. However, not that much dragon support has been given to Standard in Rastakhan's Rumble. This is where Wild will shine, where cards like Twilight Guardian, Azure Drake, and even some of the bigger dragons such as Chillmaw, Chromagus, and even Deathwing Dragonlord being in the Wild set. Dragon Warrior has always been a viable mid-range archetype in Wild, it just hasn't had any specific reason to be played, as you often get outvalued by control decks such as Reno Lock or Big Priest. With the introduction of Warmaster Voon and the sprinkling in of new dragons such as Dragonmaw Scorcher, the archetype is now worth considering and potentially a mainstay of this expansion. The main deck building thought about Dragon Warrior is that there are two main ways that the archetype can be built. You can go with Control Dragon Warrior, similar to how the deck was in Blackrock Mountain with cards like Blackwing Corruptor and really big dragons like Alexstrasza and Deathwing included. Personally, we feel that Warmaster Voon falls better into the Tempo archetype, as generating value while playing for the board is something that he does well in his current stat line. However, we could see him being rather strong in a value control warrior archetype if the meta was to slow down a bit and the deck was able to come back into the limelight 4 years after its initial inception. The Undertaker. With the reveal of the Undertaker, Standard was excited, as this card seems to be a rather powerful legendary. However, when looking at it from under a Wild lens, this card is one of the strongest cards printed in this set, and will most likely be the card that sees the most play in Wild, barring another left-field hidden synergy like Star Aligner. Death Rattles are inherently strong in Wild, with cards such as Sylvanas and Sneed's Shredder in the card pool. Death Rattle-themed decks are already mainstays in the Wild meta due to N'Zoth, and with the introduction of the Undertaker, these decks have the potential to make quite the large increase in their power level. One of the things that needs to be kept in mind when these decks are built is that the Death Rattles that the Undertaker gets are 3 randomly selected ones from the card pool that you've played. Oftentimes, the Death Rattle on minions like these are supplemented by the bodies that the cards are on, such as a card like Rotten Apple Bomb, or even negative with a positive body like Deathlord. Cards like these need to be mitigated when building a deck that'll feature the Undertaker, but in Wild you have so many Death Rattle minions that you can always pick alternative ones which have stronger Death Rattle effects. Expect Undertaker to make some minor deck building changes in order to capitalize on the strengths that he currently covers. These are our top 5 picks for cards which are stronger in Wild than Standard for Rastakhan. What do you think? Do you think any other cards will be sleeper picks for Wild? Leave a comment below if you agree with any of these cards or if there were some that you thought we missed. Don't forget to leave a like and follow, and as always, stay tuned for our next Tempo Storm Hearthstone video.